Welcome to The State of Us. Real people with honest opinions and the future of responsible media. Here's your host, Justin T. Weller.
Should birthright citizenship end? Well, the president raised this notion during his campaign and again yesterday in an interview with Axios. We will look at if he can actually do this, and then, of course, the larger issue of birthright citizenship. Of course, a critical question is, why do you care? And we've got nobody better situated to explain that to you than our senior resident historian.
Your friendly redneck liberal, Lance Jackson.
Well, hello, everybody. Okay, so tell me, Justin, why should I care?
Obviously, the immigration issue has been one that's been, it's been here ever since Trump, before Trump. It's been here the whole time, and it continues with this. He raised it, as we mentioned, back in the campaign. And we've talked about the whole quote unquote immigration issue a number of times, but we haven't dedicated any time to actually answering, I think, the reason that people care, the larger question of why are you entitled to citizenship / how do we think about citizenship? Because I do think a lot of people in this country don't value they don't value it until it's threatened. And then it's like, oh, well, I probably want to keep that. So I think because of that sentiment, the value of being a citizen, it's worth thinking about. And regardless, there's the other approach too of any time a president talks about modifying the way that we've always interpreted the Constitution or suggesting a different interpretation. I think anybody who is a citizen should care anytime that's said, because that's the president commenting on what his interpretation of said Constitution is, which in turn may translate to some people that the president gets to appoint to the Supreme Court. So there's a lot of different reasons you'd care, but I think it comes down to when we're talking about citizenship and what it means to be a citizen. If you're a citizen, it pertains to you to some degree, right? That's why you care. But we're going to actually play the audio here of the interview yesterday that was published by Axios that President Trump sat down with and talked to.
On immigration, some legal scholars believe you can get rid of birthright citizenship without changing the Constitution.
With an executive order.
Exactly.
Right.
Have you thought about that?
Yes.
Tell me more.
It was always told to me that you needed a constitutional amendment.
Right.
Guess
14th
what?
Amendment.
You don't.
You don't.
Number one, you don't need that. Number two,
I mean, that's in dispute.
You could definitely
that's very much in dispute.
Well, you can definitely do it with an act of Congress, but now they're saying I can do it just with an executive order. Now, how ridiculous. We're the only country in the world where a person comes in, has a baby, and the baby is essentially a citizen of the United States for 85 years with all of those benefits. It's ridiculous. It's ridiculous. And it has to end.
Have you talked about that with counsel?
Yeah, I have.
So where in the process?
It's in the process. It'll happen. With an executive order. That's what you're talking about, right?
Yeah,
that's
it's
a very
exactly
interesting
what I'm talking about.
I didn't think anybody knew that but me. I thought I was the only one. Jonathan,
I've got
I'm
a good
impressed.
guess. Good
I'm
guess.
impressed.
Okay, so there it is. That's the president's own words there on it. The interesting thing, though,
Has the 10% middle class tax cut passed yet?
what's that?
Well, he told me a week ago. I was watching. He said we're going to pass a middle class tax cut before the midterm elections.
Uh-huh.
Congress isn't in session, but that's what he told me. He told me that was the truth.
Mm-hmm.
Has that passed yet?
Just like that we're the only country in the world, right, that does this.
Right.
When in fact there's at least 30 other countries,
Right.
including some of our closest trade partners like Canada and Mexico, who both have the same thing. So if two Americans go into Canada and have their child across the border, that's a Canadian. It's worth noting that those 30 countries, including Canada and Mexico, that analysis was actually completed by the Center for Immigration Studies, which is an organization that supports restricting immigration and whose work Mr. Trump's advisors have often cited. So we're just making that note as we didn't go out and find an anti-Trump source and then said, oh, well, they say. No, this is actually one that Mr. Trump's own people have used to defend policies on immigration in the past. So we're referencing the New York Times today. They published the article yesterday, October 30th on this. And interestingly enough, they're not the only ones that dispute some of what Trump has said. House Speaker Paul Ryan of Wisconsin said in an interview that the president, quote, obviously cannot eviscerate birthright citizenship by executive order. Quote, you obviously cannot do that. I'm a believer in following the plain text of the Constitution, and I think in this case, the 14th Amendment is pretty clear, and that would involve a very, very lengthy constitutional process, end quote. Mr. Ryan went on, actually, though, to compare the idea of doing so, and I thought this was interesting, to Barack Obama's 2012 action to grant work permits and deportation reprieves to some undocumented immigrants brought to the United States as children. Republicans, including Mr. Trump at the time, ferociously protested as a naked abuse of presidential power. So there was a different situation where the former president tried to do something along these lines that was, what many Republicans said was a unilateral going against what the Constitution says. And now you have a Republican attempting to do what appears to be just that. It seems from what the Constitution actually says, which is all persons born or naturalized in the United States and subject to the jurisdiction thereof are citizens of the United States and the state wherein they reside. Before we get to the asking the bigger question here of kind of discussing this birthright citizenship idea, let's first break down the obvious legal side of this, right? Mm-hmm. So the president can issue an executive order hypothetically on anything, mm-hmm. right? And then the way the branches of government work, Lance, correct me if I'm wrong, is that there could be a case brought before the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court will determine what the Constitution means here.
Yep. Either
validating said executive order or nullifying said executive order.
That is true.
Is that the way it should work?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Any other thoughts?
Scary thought
on this. I know, right? The process.
No, it's scary when you think of what Trump and the Senate have done with the Supreme Court, that it's very possible that he could do this. And I'm not in that camp that says, like, there are conservative and liberal lawyers who together say there's no way Trump can win this in the Supreme Court. I'm not going to go on the record and say that because I'm not sure where we are right now. I just no hyperbole here, but I feel like we're really close to an open Civil War type here in history.
Yeah.
I mean, it's amazing how far apart we are and how upset people are getting with all of these things that are being said and done in the country on either side. I mean, as you point out, either side.
Yeah.
I'm not saying one side's to blame over the other. I'm just saying I don't ever remember seeing people, you have to go back to watching the news from 1968 to 1973
to find people
and the Vietnam War for me to find people in my lifetime to be this opposed to on political issues.
It's probably not for this show.
And that was one issue. This is today it's repeated issue.
Yeah.
Back then it was whether or not the United States should be involved in the Vietnam conflict, the Vietnam War. This now is anything that either side brings up.
Far-reaching.
Brings out extreme emotions in people on both sides.
I wonder to what extent. I guess we'll let you at home contemplate this for us. Give us some answers at TrueChat ORG, Facebook, Twitter, etc. To what extent? I talk a lot about. We both do the media, and what they report and how they report it. But I wonder to what extent not the media, but the leaders of both parties are responsible for the tensions that we feel now. In other words, the question I'm posing is, are the everyday citizens actually this divided, or are they being led to continue to be more divided by their respective political parties? In other words, is the rhetoric of their leaders further splitting them. And I do mean both sides, because I get so many campaign emails, because I have subscribed to emails from both, like the RNC and the DNC, so that I can see what they're saying about each other. But I mean, it's disgusting, Lance, and on both sides, it's just horrifying the amount of, just mean that's there. So I don't know. Think about that, everybody. Let us know. I know that's not what we're talking about today, but I think it's worth a contemplation of, to what extent is it that? If you had a leader who was, of your party, who was more respectful and kinder, there's just no other way to say it. I wish there was a better word, but just nicer, would it be different? So the big question that I wanted to focus on with this, because I think it is something that merits a discussion, regardless of whether or not you agree with, or if you think there's any merit to Trump being able, I don't, for what it's worth. The whole executive order thing, I don't think that holds up in the Supreme Court. I know we will say, well, 2 of them, have been appointed by Trump, but at the same time, I think that the records of the people who are on the Supreme Court right now indicate that, for the most part, those on the conservative side tend to view the Constitution the way that Speaker Ryan indicated, which is that it's pretty clear, I think, what it says. And there are places, to be fair, there are places where the Constitution is not, where it is kind of vague or nondescript. But here, I think it's pretty straightforward. But first we'll look at that Constitution point, Lance. So we heard all persons born or naturalized in the United States, and then we have this interesting insert here, comma, and subject to the jurisdiction thereof, comma, are citizens of the United States and of the state wherein they reside. So with that, that's actually what brought up a comment from Mike Pence, who said, quote, "We all cherish the language of the 14th Amendment, but the Supreme Court of the United States has never ruled on whether the language of the 14th Amendment," and he cites specifically, quote, "subject to the jurisdiction thereof," end quote, "applies specifically to people who are in the country illegally," end quote, Vice President Mike Pence. So I think what he's hinting at there, and this is, I guess, the part that we'll talk about just a little bit, is, and subject to the jurisdiction thereof. Are people who enter our country subject to our jurisdiction? I think the immediate reaction is yes, right?
If they commit a crime, do you want them to be punished? That's jurisdiction.
Right. And that's where you get into that conundrum of.
So if you want to not give them the rights of citizenship, then that means you have to let them commit crimes, and you can't punish them because they're not under your jurisdiction.
Right. So that'd be
right? Am I off base?
Saying, you go down that route,
you can't have your cake and eat it too.
Yeah.
It's one or the other, right?
That's the logic. Yes. If they're not subject to your jurisdiction, which, I could see, right? I could see a legitimate argument being made to that, but then you have to understand that applies to other things,
right?
Like what you're talking about. So if somebody does come in, these quote unquote murders and rapists, right? And they do murder and rape people, well, we can't do anything because they're not under our jurisdiction. That is, and that's not extreme, people. That's just if I'm a lawyer, right? And we get the Supreme Court to say, well, yeah, people who come in here illegally are not subject to our jurisdiction, then that extends to, everything. That's what that means. Whether you're talking about peaceful illegal aliens or menacing ones, either way, that applies to all of them. So it means you can't do anything to them.
You don't get to pick and choose jurisdiction.
That's right. So I guess that's that would be the only way I would see a legitimate, the case being made. Well, what the framers meant when they said subject to the jurisdiction thereof were people who were.
But the
here
framers
legally.
didn't write the 14th Amendment.
Yeah.
So.
But that's a whole nother.
Right.
People like to talk about
the 14th Amendment came after
things.
the fighting of the Civil War. and during the process of trying to bring the nation back together in the time period known as the Reconstruction.
Yes.
So the framers didn't write this.
The Reconstruction framers, the people who said, "Oh, gee, we probably need to spell out a few of these things because it has occurred to us that there's a problem where it's not really clear what." And so,
because it goes back to the Dred Scott case of 1857, Dred Scott versus Sanford, where a black man sued for his freedom because he stepped on free soil, and the Southern leaning Supreme Court ruled that no, slaves are property. You can take your property anywhere in America.
And it's still your property.
And it's still your property. You can take your kitchen table, right, and move it from Florida to Ohio, and it's still your kitchen table.
Right.
And that's what the Supreme Court deemed slaves were in that 1857 landmark case, which hence was one reason why the 14th Amendment had to be written.
Mm-hmm. Well, you have a whole kind of during this time period.
Because we took away a whole
several amendments,
level
right,
of
that were all
citizenship,
all around this idea of specifically identifying what constitutes a free person, what constitutes being a citizen, and who can vote.
1865 to 1870.
Yeah. Because the discovery and, through the Civil War, it became very clear that these things weren't as clear as they needed to be. And so we put them, no pun intended, in black and white. And so that would be the thought. But moving away from the constitutional interpretation, since Lance nor I are lawyers, but we do have common sense. Sorry. I think it's a fascinating discussion about setting aside the Constitution. A citizen of any country, particularly one where the people, air quotes there, elect their leaders through one form or fashion. What gives you the right to be a citizen? And I mean, you can say, well, the Constitution does, right? I'm saying, why does the Constitution give you that right? What gives you the right to be a citizen of this country? Because we make other people, right, who weren't born here, go through very extensive process to become a citizen. And as we have talked about, we did on the War to Save America. Do
you want to develop a whole second and third? You want to develop a caste system like India? Is that what you want?
I didn't say that.
Well, I mean,
I asked a question.
Okay.
And now you're asking a question.
Now I'm asking a question. Yeah.
That's a good question.
Because if you don't have that, that's what you develop. You develop a caste system where some people are more citizens than others. Some people have more rights than others. And so we believe in the equality of the egalitarian system that we have, that people are equal. And so therefore, if you're born here, we're all equal. We're all citizens. So it's the equality issue. And that's what separates us from other countries in the world. That's why people are fighting around the world to have that which we have, and I know where you're coming from because we've discussed this many times on and off the air, where you believe people take their citizenship for granted. Okay, but anytime you had something for so long that it's just become a part of your life, yes, you do start to take it for granted. But when you look out across the world, people are fighting to get what we have. So obviously we must have something pretty good.
Mm-hmm.
And if you take it away, now in my mind, you develop a caste system, and I don't want to do that. And again, like in the United States, not everything here is perfect, but why do so many people want to try to come here? Why do so many people want to emulate our system of government? How come so many people want to emulate our Constitution? They may tweak it to fit their country or their needs or whatever, but that has been the prevailing source since the United States was created. So we must be doing more things right with our Constitution and citizenship and system of government than other places. Since people are either A, trying to get here, or B, trying to make the same thing happen in their country.
Mm-hmm. Well, let us know what your guys' thoughts are so far on this question. Should birthright citizenship end? And the larger question, I guess, that I'm talking about of why do we get to be citizens? What value does it have? Because I think talking about it is one of those
because
things
we started
that
something new.
That's
why I tried to answer your question.
Yeah, I know.
I don't think, okay, you kind of said that like, well, I didn't really get my question answered. I answered your question.
No, I just want to know what other people think.
We started a new concept here. Mm-hmm. That's why it exists, is because we started something different than what everybody else had. We started something away from serfdom and princes and kings and queens and monarchies and all. We started something different here. We started a social experiment here. Now, that's why. And if you want to take it away, my point is then you're going to, for whatever reason, you're going to go back to those things where you develop classes of citizens. And I don't mean middle class, lower class. I'm talking about where people are.
I know.
Well, again, for our audience, because we got the lower class, we got the middle class. I'm not talking economically. Yeah. I'm talking about with the rights of everyone being the same, which isn't, sorry people, get out from behind your iPhones and read up on the rest of the world. There aren't very many places like America where we have all of these rights. And I think my esteemed co-host is saying sometimes we take those things for granted and we don't realize what we have. And he's right. But that doesn't mean we do away with them or make it harder to be a citizen, because to me, the flip side is something that America wasn't started about.
I think there's like with everything in life, there's a balance. Obviously, if being a citizen, whether you're born here or not, I mean, forget that part of citizenship, people. We're opening the broader conversation here. If it's grossly easy, just like with anything in life, then it has no value. At the same time, or you don't give it value. It may have value, but you might not give it value like you should. At the same time, if it's too difficult and no one can have it, then maybe it has a perceived value, but what good is that value if people can't use it? So that's kind of what do you guys think about Lance's thoughts so far and the general discussion? I'm not trying to ask super specific questions, because I do want us to let it, percolate here and see what we come up with. But one of the reasons we're talking about this and we're willing to have this bigger conversation, where I think the media is mostly focused on so far what the president said about it, which isn't unfair. I mean, obviously they're reporting on what's happening. But I want us to be able to take that opportunity to pull back further and to uphold TrueChat's mission, which is to have honest, open, and respectful conversations in the pursuit of educating the people. So that's why we're doing this. And we're hoping that it's thought-provoking, if nothing else. But if you think we're not in line with our mission, ethics@truechat.org. You could email info too, but it'll be faster if you email ethics@truechat.org.
Might not get to us at info.
That's right. The wrong people will get it. If you have a comment, you can send it to info, or you could just use social media @TrueChat.org. Everywhere social media.
So do you have something else in mind that you want to do for citizenship in the United States other than birthright?
Well, or
are you just throwing things out there just to get people to think?
Yeah. I think
do you have something in mind that you want?
It's mainly to think. I won't say I want it. I've thought a lot about I haven't come to something that I feel strongly is better than what we have. But I have given a lot of thought to what we had talked about on the War to Save America, which was the process we wanted to make people who weren't citizens go through to become citizens, which was this basic idea of you're going to have to pass a civics test that's somewhere between 10 and 20 questions, and you got to get an 80% or better. And the questions are going to be based on what we teach and test on in our own schools nationwide. And I thought that was a good, you're going to say the Pledge of Allegiance in front of a judge, and the judge will bestow citizenship upon you. And that was the gist of the process. It was a little more involved than that. We won't get into all those details because that's not really the point of this as far as from an immigration standpoint. But I've thought a lot about also the questions of, we say, okay, well, you're born, you're a citizen. I've contested for a while, though, you're a second-class citizen, and you are until you turn 21, at least, because up until, depending on the state you're in, up until 16, you can't drive. Up until 18, you can't die for your country and you can't sign legal documents. And up until you're 21, you can't consume alcohol. So are you a citizen? Well, we'll say yes because it makes everybody who's over those ages comfortable to say those people are citizens. But that's also been used for people under those ages.
You want 5-year-olds driving and drinking?
No.
Oh, okay.
But at the same time, I think it begs the question of, we do lots of things that impact people who are under those ages, right? And they do not have a say in how that stuff's handled. I get the whole argument of you don't want 5-year-olds and stuff driving, but as somebody who's 17, should they have a say in how they could be drafted the following year to go die? And then my answer would be, well, it depends on the 17-year-old. And I think a lot of people would say, well, sure, if we could just have this super fair system where, you could, based on your level of interest in what's going on and your level of education on what's going on, then you could have the right to vote, even if you're under the age. My point is, in all of that, I think we already have some of those things, and it's not just an age-related thing, because it works in reverse, right? For old people. They get to a certain point and the healthcare system, I don't want to say it turns against them because I don't think they're out to get them, but it turns to a point of, okay, well now, your children are making more of these decisions for you and they get to say, what's best. And you've probably given them, right, that power. But I think there's things like that on both ends of the spectrum that just merit additional thought on. It's easy to say that we're all citizens and we're all equal. It's another thing to look at.
So 15 to 65-year-olds get to vote, and everybody else outside of that is deemed upon what society wants.
Right. Good luck.
Okay.
Yeah. No, and that's why I'm saying I don't feel strongly about any of these, other than I think it's a fascinating conversation because with most of the way the country is, I think a lot of the times we just say, well, this is the way, quote unquote, it's always been, which a lot of times, as Lance and I have talked about, isn't true because it's not the way it's always been. But that's the way it's always been. Therefore, it's not worth talking about whether or not there's a better option. And I'm just suggesting to people listening today that I hope you spend some time thinking about it. And maybe we say it's fine the way it is and everything should stay like it is. But I also think raising the question hopefully helps you realize what Lance was saying earlier, which is there is a big value to your citizenship. There are people around the world who are fighting and dying because they want those kinds of rights. And remembering that, I think, hopefully it would help us be nicer to each other as citizens of the same country that we supposedly all have the same rights in, guaranteed rights. That's why I like history, because there's a lot of that nobility in what we were trying to do, even if there was corruption the whole way, right?
Sure.
We still managed to come out of it with mostly, as you said, more noble than not.
Well, and like you said, you come up with other ideas, but nothing's better than what we have.
Yeah.
I mean, you've put some thought into it and you can't come up with anything that's better. And that's my point is like, okay. And I guess people have missed the last 45 years of me coming to my opinions. I've spent a lot of time reading and dissecting and thinking and reading what other people have to say to have these opinions. So when I come down as like, well, this is the way it is, it's not because I haven't put thought into it. I've put a lot of thought into it and I don't have time to share with you all of the different values and readings and opinions that have come into forming these opinions at this age where my children, I guess, are going to have to start taking care of me according to you.
Right. You're approaching.
I'm not going to get that right. Yeah. I just had that conversation with my daughter last night. Mm-hmm. You do know that, you take me out of my house and put me in one of those homes, I will haunt you. Mm-hmm. Just so you know. And she goes, Dad, we've had this conversation. I said, I'm just making sure.
I'll figure it out.
No.
I'll get it done.
Whether I have dementia or whatever, if, I do not want to be put somewhere with a bunch of other people. I want to be in my own abode. So just know that. Now, now here you are as another young person attacking me saying, oh, you're getting so old. Maybe we better think about taking away your right to vote, take away your right to drive, take away your right to have health insurance because you're too old.
Well, see, but I was intentionally defending some of that, I think, because I've seen, maybe not so much people I care about, but other people's families where they do get to that stage, and it's awful because
it is,
that's a whole conversation by itself. But that's part of my point. And when we think about this, you're a citizen, but what things, and forget about the two ends, right? In between there, the two, super annoying.
We ran out of time. I looked up, it was 7. I looked up, it was 02.
The people in between those ages too. I mean, I think there's different times where different kinds of people throughout life as a citizen, even though it's not a right, they almost have rights taken away because they feel like they don't have any other choice. And so I'm not suggesting that we have to change things because of that, but episodes like this and where we do get to talk about what are your rights helps remind people, no, you do have them. And in some ways, a lot of them are etched almost in stone, things that have been upheld for a long time that haven't changed, and this is one of them, the 14th Amendment.
Well, and the point is, if you don't use them, you run the risk of having people come along,
run the risk of losing them.
taking them away from you.
Yes.
This is the point. I mean, to me, and that's my point with this, is that you're right. Sometimes many, many people do just take it for granted. And so here's another case in point. If you don't use it, if you don't fight to protect it, there are people out there that will take it away because it benefits them
to get rid of it
from you not having said right, be it voting, fighting, taxation. I don't care what the right is. Just understand, if you don't get involved in the operations of this country, you run the risk of somebody who is interested in taking that power or that right away from you.
Yep.
That part is true. That part I agree with you.
Yeah. We'll leave it there to think about. Like I said, I haven't come up with anything better. Lance has been thinking about it a while. But I do think there's a lot of different things we could do on immigration to make it better besides the way we're going about it. So let us know your thoughts, other ways we could improve the system. Maybe you guys have something. Hey, the power in numbers. Maybe your brains out there can come up with something that Lance and I are like, we haven't thought about that. It's possible. So let us know at TrueChat.org. And of course, you can find this podcast and all other TrueChat podcasts on
Spotify, Stitcher, and Apple Podcast products or something.
Yes, just Apple Podcasts.
Oh, Apple Podcasts. Okay.
And anywhere else fine podcasts are found. For the State of Us.
That's pretty broad.
I know.
In any other place where.
Fine podcast. Well, see, fine is subjective. That way we don't get pigeonholed into, well, you're not on so-and-so, because these things sprout up all the time. So
okay.
That's the point there. Plausible deniability.
So I got 2.5.
2.5. That's right. Well, it was 2 3/4. You're being a little too harsh there. You had it almost all.
It's just Apple Podcasts.
Apple Podcasts. Yep.
Okay. Not Apple Pie a la mode.
No.
Okay.
No. Although the State of Us is best paired with an apple pie.
Right.
For the State of Us on True Chat in Urbana, I'm Justin T. Weller.
And I'm Lance Jackson.
Thank you so much for tuning in. We'll see you next time on the State of Us. Go vote.